Welcome to Starbound, where every star tells a story. In a desolate future where humanity clings to survival against a coldly efficient alien force, can one retired soldier's desperate strategy turn the tide of an unwinnable war? Let's get into the story. The rhythmic thump of rotors tore through the otherwise peaceful morning. Dan Bingham grimaced, one hand reaching for the ancient rifle beside his bed. Not again. The sleek dropship emblazoned with the sigil of Earth's Defense Force meant trouble, the kind he'd spent years avoiding. His feline companion, a battle-scarred cat named Jess, meowed with an irritation that echoed his own. The scratching at his door signaled the inevitable. His carefully constructed isolation was about to crumble. It was a simple life, tending the meager crops that clung to the irradiated soil, the occasional hunt to supplement rations, and a silence punctuated only by the wind and Jess's rumbling purrs. Yet there was a relentless pull to the past, a phantom weight he could never quite shake. The soldier at his door, a kid barely old enough to shave it looked like, was all breathless energy and ill-fitting combat armor. "Sir!" the boy squeaked, a note of awe coloring his turn. "Commander wants you back, sir. The Kerokan. They hit Sarah's station. Thousands dead." Dan's fingers tightened on the rifle. Sarah's was a haven for refugees fleeing Earth's barren wastes. Thousands. Cold rage ignited within him. One long banked but never extinguished. "All right, son," he rasped, the years of disuse making his voice rough. "Guess there's no rest for the weary." The shuttle shuddered as it breached the atmosphere, revealing a wasteland of scorched earth and skeletal cities. Even from this distance, the devastation on Sarah's was evident, a testament to the Kerokan's ruthlessness. Dan was no stranger to war, but this felt different. There was a calculated precision to the destruction, a terrifying efficiency that surpassed the brutality of any human conflict he'd endured. "Kerokan ship sigil, sir," the pilot murmured, his eyes never leaving the targeting screen. "We never stood a chance." The undercurrent of fear was barely concealed. Dan snorted. "Never underestimate a cornered animal, son. Humans have a nasty habit of biting back." He disembarked at the makeshift command center, a whirlwind of activity amidst the chaos. Survivors, faces etched with shock and despair, were being herded into medical tents. The stench of burnt flesh and ozone hung heavy in the air. The commander, a grim-faced woman with streaks of silver in her close-cropped hair, met his gaze with a grim nod. "Bingham," she grunted. "Figured we'd have to drag you out of retirement sooner or later." A flicker of something akin to respect sparked in her eyes. "The Kerokan, they're not what we—" She faltered, as if she was searching for the right word. "Expected." "I saw the scans," Dan interjected. "Cold-blooded, efficient. Never seen anything like it." It wasn't a question, but the information he sought was laced within the statement. The commander gestured to a holotable displaying the tactical feed. "Fast, maneuverable warships, energy shields that deflect most of our conventional weaponry, and..." Her voice hardened. "They're not taking prisoners." Waves of unease echoed through the room. Whispers of extermination and end of days hissed like serpents, a testament to the chilling fear that had gripped what was left of humanity's forces. Dan felt a surge of disgust mingled with a cold determination. He'd danced with death before, faced horrors most could never comprehend in their darkest nightmares. If anyone on this godforsaken rock stood a chance, it was him. "Let's see what these bastards are made of." He growled, the words tasting like steel in his mouth. The intel was grim. The Kerokan were relentless, advancing with a speed that had taken the defense force by surprise. Outpost after outpost fell, each loss a blow to their dwindling resources and fragile morale. Dan buried the ghosts of his past losses, forcing a ruthless focus on the present. The Kerokan were playing a game they thought they had mastered, but the rules were about to change. "Spread the word," he rasped to the wide-eyed comms officer. "I want every able-bodied survivor topside, armed and ready. We're gonna teach these aliens a lesson they won't forget. A lesson that humanity doesn't go down without one hell of a fight." Dan stalked through the makeshift armory, Jess weaving around his legs with an unusual tension. He paused before a scarred blast shield marked with the insignia of his old unit. The Hellhounds. They were specters now, wiped out in a classified op that had nearly claimed his life as well. Yet seeing their sigil ignited a dormant fire within him, a reminder of the soldier he once was. A glint of metal caught his eye. He reached past the outdated laser rifles, ignoring the shiny new plasma weaponry favored by the younger generation. Nestled in the forgotten corner was a relic. A railgun, so ancient it was almost mythical. The weapon thrummed with a dormant power as he hefted it, a familiar weight setting into his worn hands. The soldiers who gathered on the ravaged plains were a motley crew. Weathered refugees, hardened veterans missing limbs, and kids who looked barely old enough to wield their weapons. They were a testament to humanity's desperate struggle. Dan surveyed them, the ghost of 1,000 hard-won battles flickering in his eyes. "Listen up!" His voice boomed across the desolation. They may have looked broken, but he saw something else. The same defiance reflected in his own soul. The Kerokan think they can roll over us, crush us like insects. They think we're weak, predictable. Well, today we change the narrative. Today we show them why messing with humanity is a death sentence. A murmur rippled through the crowd, building into a ragged cheer. Jess hissed defiantly, his fur bristling in tandem with the rising energy. "We may be outgunned," Dan continued, raising the railgun as a beacon of stubborn defiance, "but we're not outmatched. We have something the Kerokan will never understand. The human spirit. We fight dirty, we improvise, and we don't give up. Not ever." He scanned their faces, seeing a spark of something dangerous and beautiful igniting. This is where he belonged, not hiding from the world, but leading the charge against it. He was Dan Bingham, former hellhound, the embodiment of humanity's ferocious will, and the Kerokan had made a grave error in waking the beast. Dan's plan was born of desperation and seasoned insanity. His tattered band of survivors was a gnat compared to the Kerokan's overwhelming forces. There would be no elaborate tactics, no elegant strategic maneuvers. This would be a brawl, a vicious tooth-and-nail fight for survival. He divided his troops, sending small squads to lay a web of crude traps, the kind learned in the jungles and back alleys where formal training meant nothing. Snares fashioned from shattered wreckage, decoy convoys leading the enemy into minefields, and strategically placed explosives scavenged from downed ships. It was a patchwork defense, a testament to the grim creativity born of necessity. The heart of his plan, however, hinged on an asset only he truly understood. Each squad was equipped with a salvaged battlefield communicator, cobbled together from outdated tech meant to be obsolete decades ago. Their purpose was cryptic, a gamble built around a theory about the Kerokan, a weakness Dan hoped to exploit. For hours, the ragtag force melted back into the ruins, leaving the desolate plains eerily empty. The Kerokan advanced scouts, sleek fighter crafts, spitting beams of ionized plasma, found a ghost town. It was a lull, a deceptive breath before the storm. Dan hunkered down in a crumbling command bunker, the railgun cradled beside him. Jess, a comforting weight in his lap. His fingers drummed an unsteady rhythm against the cold metal table. "This thing should have been in a museum," he muttered, the flicker of humor a fleeting distraction from the knot of tension in his gut. It was a desperate wager, a roll of the dice with the fate of humanity trembling in the balance. Then, the sky tore open. The guttural roar of Kerokan dropships sent tremors through the shattered earth. From his vantage point, Dan saw them descend, a swarm of gleaming metal, disgorging armored figures. They moved with eerie coordination, weapons poised as they swept across the blasted landscape, clearing the ruins methodically. That chilling precision gnawed at Dan. If the Kerokan kept up this pace, his traps would be nothing more than minor inconveniences. "Now," he whispered, his finger finding the comm switch. A cacophony of noise ripped through the calculated silence. Scraps of old battle cries, defiant rock anthems, nonsensical warbles, even crude insults blared from the hidden communicators. A dissonant symphony echoing across the battlefield. The Kerokan forces faltered, their orderly advance grinding to a confused halt. Dan's lips curled into a grim smile. The Kerokan, with their superior technology and rigid strategies, had never encountered anything so chaotic, so utterly unpredictable. Their comms channels were alive with a panic buzz, the sharp clipped tones of their language filled with surprise and mounting alarm. The traps blossomed in a series of spectacular explosions, crippling a dropship and sending armored units scrambling for cover. But that was just the prelude, the first wave of chaos designed to sow discord. Dan's people surged from the ruins, not in an organized charge, but a reckless free-for-all. The old railgun boomed in his hands, each shot a testament to his honed marksmanship, punching through energy shields and shattering mechanical monstrosities. Jess, a blur of fur and teeth, darted amidst the confusion, his yowls a battle cry mirrored by the roars of the human compatriots. The Kerokan, accustomed to clinical warfare, struggled to adapt to the onslaught. Their targeting systems stuttered, confused by the unpredictable movements of their enemies. Their disciplined formations splintered as humans closed the distance, engaging in vicious hand-to-hand combat with a ferocity fueled by both desperation and the dawning realization that these bipedal creatures were far more dangerous than they seemed. Dan moved through the melee like a specter, the railgun spitting death with brutal efficiency. Amidst the roar of explosions and the screams of the dying, he was coldly focused. He saw the subtle tells in the Kerokan's movements that signaled an opening, the faint hesitation before launching an attack. More importantly, he saw fear flickering in their multifaceted eyes, the dawning horror that their prey had become the predator. The tide shifted, not in a grand cinematic reversal, but in fleeting moments of desperate valor. A Kerokan squad pinned down by a hail of scavenged grenades, a hulking alien warrior laid low by a teenager wielding a sharpened piece of rebar, a dropped ship plummeting from the sky, sabotaged by its own malfunctioning systems. But Dan knew this was far from over. The Kerokan, despite their initial shock, were a formidable force. Their lines reorganized, their weapons unleashing a renewed onslaught. Casualties mounted on the human side, every fallen body a chilling reminder of the impossible odds. A Kerokan command ship shimmered into view, its sheer size dwarfing the remnants of the human resistance. Turrets swiveled, beams of searing energy lancing across the battlefield, incinerating everything in its path. Hope flickered dangerously low as Dan watched his comrades fall. Yet a kernel of defiance refused to die. Jess clung to him, a ragged battle trophy with eyes blazing. In his tattered band of survivors, he saw not defeat, but determination hardened into something close to insanity. This was their planet, damn it, and they would bleed for every inch of it. Dan hefted his railgun, taking a steadying breath. It was time to end this. "Cover me!" he barked, his voice hoarse but unwavering. His people, those who could move, scattered, drawing fire but leaving him a clear pathway. Each blast of Kerokan weaponry came dangerously close, scorching the earth mere feet away. But Dan, focused, channeling the unwavering spirit that kept humanity thriving in the face of countless catastrophes. The command ship loomed before him, a glistening behemoth broadcasting its dominance across the wasteland. One shot. That's all he had. He squinted through the ancient scope, the intricate wiring and targeting systems a stark contrast to the sleek technology of their enemies. In his mind, he saw not the ship, but a target he'd hit 1,000 times before, back in the half-forgotten days of peace. He squeezed the trigger. The recoil of the railgun slammed into his shoulder, momentarily deafening him. In that deafening silence, he watched the projectile streak towards its target. Time seemed to stretch into a thin, fragile thread as it arced through the air, a testament to both ingenuity and desperation. The impact tore through the stillness, not with a blinding flash of an explosive, but with a sharp crack that echoed across the battlefield. The Kerokan command ship shuddered, an impossible tremor shaking its massive frame. Lights flickered across its hull, then winked out in uneven patches. A ripple of disarray washed over the Kerokan forces, breaking their terrifying synchronization. Dan gaped in disbelief, a surge of adrenaline momentarily banishing fatigue. The shot shouldn't have done anything more than annoy an enemy of that scale. Yet somehow he'd found a critical vulnerability, a hidden flaw in their supposedly impenetrable technology. "Now! Hit them now!" he roared, hope igniting in his voice for the first time in hours. His people, battered and bruised, rallied with a renewed frenzy. The chaos and confusion they'd sown had disrupted the Kerokan's command structure and crippled their communications. The battle devolved into a close-quarter savagery, hand-to-hand, weapon-to-weapon, human against alien. The Kerokan, so sure of their superiority, were faltering. They'd underestimated the spirit of a species pushed to the brink. For every human who fell, 2 more rose in their place, fueled by a cocktail of fury and the unwavering belief that they could hold on just a moment longer. Dan, emboldened, darted from cover to cover, the railgun a beacon of defiance. His aim faltered, exhaustion blurring his vision. But it didn't matter. He was just one piece of a resistance that had awakened, proving to the galaxy that humanity was a hurricane in humanoid form. The sky darkened as the Kerokan reinforcements arrived, yet the tide refused to turn again. It was a stalemate, a bloody, brutal deadlock bought with sweat and tears. And somewhere, perhaps within the crippled command ship or amongst the disoriented troops, the Kerokan were starting to realize the horrifying truth. This fight, this planet, was not worth the cost. As twilight painted the battlefield in shades of exhaustion, the Kerokan began a hesitant withdrawal. At first, it was sporadic, units pulling back to regroup under the cover of hovering gunships. But chaos bred chaos, and soon the retreat became a disorganized scramble. Dan sank to his knees, the railgun clattering from numb fingers. His body screamed in protest. His vision swam with the ghosts of the fallen. Around him, his people slumped against the ruins, weary yet alight with the exhilaration of impossible survival. Even Jess, normally tireless, lay in a panting heap at his feet. The battered command center flickered back to life, filled with static and bursts of panic communication. Yet cutting through the distortion was a crackling transmission, not in the clipped, harsh language of the Kerokan, but in a human voice filled with both shock and awe. "Bingham? Is that really you?" Commander Graves' voice, normally so stern, held a note of bewildered disbelief. "What in God's name did you do out there?" He blinked and let out a ragged laugh that turned into a coughing fit. "I showed him why you never corner a wounded animal, Commander," he rasped. "Especially not one that bites this hard." Word of their improbable victory spread through the shattered defense network, a beacon of defiance in a sea of despair. The Kerokan assault on Sarah's station had been repulsed, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through sheer, bloody-minded stubbornness. The fight was far from over. The Kerokan would return, analyze their failure, adapt, but they would do so with a newfound grudging respect for the deceptively primitive species inhabiting a scarred, insignificant little planet called Earth. Dan, as weary as he was, couldn't help but feel a flicker of grim satisfaction. The universe had finally learned a hard and painful lesson. When war came knocking, humanity answered, not with surrender, but with the vengeance that would echo across the stars. In the aftermath, Dan Bingham did not become a hero paraded before cheering crowds. Instead, he slipped back into the shadows. He'd done his part. The tactical minds, the strategists far smarter than he, would chart the path forward. There would be more battles, more blood and sacrifice, but today, for this brief flicker of time, there was a precious gift he allowed himself: rest. His small dwelling, once a lonely refuge, was now filled with the hum of voices and the warmth of camaraderie. The veterans he'd fought alongside treated him with a rough respect he'd long forgotten he was capable of earning. New recruits stared in open-mouthed awe, their whispers filled with the tales of the battle-worn Titan and his ferocious feline sidekick. Jess, once a hunter of irradiated rats, was now feasting upon scraps of real meat, his contented purrs the closest Dan ever came to a victory song. The commander even visited, her grim face softened by a tentative smile. There was talk of strategy, of defenses to bolster, of inevitable future conflicts. Dan listened, offered the occasional gruff insight, but his mind was already drifting. He found himself drawn back to the battlefield, not as a soldier, but as a scavenger. The Kerokan left behind more than corpses. Their technology held secrets, clues to their strengths and weaknesses. Among the wreckage, Dan moved with the practiced eye of an old predator, recognizing patterns missed by the bright-eyed engineers tasked with deciphering the alien hardware. It was gritty work, more akin to his past than any future glory that might await him. But in the silent hum of alien machinery, he found a strange sense of purpose. One evening, as the twin moons cast long shadows across the scarred landscape, Dan sat on a crumbling rooftop with Jess nestled against him. Below, the makeshift camp buzzed with activity, a vibrant defiance against the encroaching darkness. "We did it, old friend," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper above the desert wind. "Bought him some time." A rumble resonated in Jess's throat, the answer of a fellow warrior content with the day's battles won. Perhaps the next would be harder, the losses greater. But in that moment, as the stars glittered with cold indifference, Dan Bingham, former soldier, reluctant savior, knew a profound truth. As long as a single defiant human heart still beat, the universe's worst nightmare would never truly sleep.